The neon sign of the purring comet flickered, with a desperate arrhythmic spasm, casting a sickly violet hue over the puddles of leaked coolant that stained the docking bay floor. In the gray drift, even the light seemed tired. This was the edge of the known map, a collection of patchwork supply stations drifting like a raft of rotting timber in a dark ocean where the laws of the coalition were as thin as the smoke from a cheap cigar. Will sat at the end of the bar, his posture a masterpiece of calculated ruin. To the naked eye, and even to the passive biometric scanners mounted above the door, he was a wreck. His left shoulder slumped 3 inches lower than his right. His eyelids were heavy, drooping at an angle that suggested his brain was operating on emergency power. He stared into a glass of amber liquid that smelled like engine degreaser, and regret his finger tracing the rim with a lack of coordination that was painful to watch. Internally, however, Will was running a high-frequency diagnostic. Heart rate 45 beats per minute, adrenaline suppression active, pupillary response delayed by 0.2 seconds. Speech center slur algorithm engaged at 60% intensity. The drunk act was not merely acting. It was a biological override. It was a classified Special Forces protocol designed to mask the sharp predatory signals of a heightened nervous system. If anyone looked too closely, they would see a man drowning in ethanol, not an operative monitoring the reflection in the dirty mirror behind the bar for a target that had not yet arrived. "You are going to spill that," a voice rasped from behind the counter. Will looked up, letting his head loll slightly to the side. Pavo, the owner of the Comet, scrubbed a glass with a rag that looked dirtier than the floor. Pavo was avian, his feathers a dull molting gray, and his beak was chipped a souvenir from a disagreement about a tab 3 years ago. "I have excellent equilibrium," Will said, the words tumbling out of his mouth like marbles spilling from a jar. He pushed a credit chip across the scarred metal surface. "Another round, for the road." Pavo snatched the chip, his black eyes narrowing. "You possess a strange habit, human. You drink like a man trying to forget his own name, yet you pay your tab with the precision of a tax auditor. Exactly 15 credits. No tip, no fumble, no haggling. It is suspicious." "I am a functioning dysfunction," Will slurred, offering a lopsided grin that didn't reach his eyes. A metallic whirring sound approached from the left. Moss, the service droid, glided over on a single, squeaky wheel. The droid's chassis was dented, and someone had spray-painted a crude smiley face over its vocal processor. "Sir," Moss said, its voice a pleasant synthesized baritone that clashed horribly with the dingy surroundings. "Would you like me to package your remaining dignity in a to-go box? It appears you have dropped most of it on the floor." "Funny," Will muttered, grabbing the bottle Pavo slammed down. "You are funny, Moss. Remind me to reprogram your humor setting to 0 when I get my tools." "My humor is hard-coded, sir. Much like your inability to handle synthesized whiskey." Will lifted the glass, but he didn't drink. He watched the reflection in the mirror. The bar was filling up. Scavengers, data thieves, and pilots who had flown too close to a solar flare and fried their frontal lobes. It was a symphony of desperation. But the note he was waiting for hadn't played yet. Then the air pressure in the room seemed to drop. The heavy blast doors at the entrance hissed open, not with the usual mechanical groan, but with a sudden sharp intake of breath. Kaya walked in. She did not walk like a patron. She walked like a blade cutting through silk. She was failure tall, and lean, her movements possessing a fluid, coiled grace that made the humans in the room look like lumbering sacks of meat. A heavy cloak hung from her shoulders, concealing the curvature of her armor, but it could not hide the triangular ears that swiveled atop her head, twitching at the sound of ice clinking against glass. Her eyes were vertical slits of molten gold scanning the room, not for threats, but for prey. Will felt a spike in his cortisol levels. He forced his heart rate back down. "Steady. You are just a drunk. You are part of the furniture." Kaya moved toward the bar, the crowd parting instinctively. The failure culture was built on 3 things: honor scent, and the absolute willingness to disembowel anyone who insulted the first two. She stopped 3 stools away from Will. She didn't order. She simply inhaled. Her nose wrinkled. A low, guttural sound, almost subsonic, vibrated in her throat. Will kept his gaze on his drink, but he adjusted his peripheral vision. She wasn't smelling the alcohol. She wasn't smelling the sweat of the miners. She was tracking something else. She turned her head slowly, locking those gold eyes onto Will's slumped form. She knows Will thought the realization cold and sharp. How does she know my thermal signature is masked? My pheromones are neutralized. Kaya stepped closer, ignoring Pavo, who had reached for the shotgun under the counter. She leaned in, invading Will's personal space. The scent of her was distinct ozone dry grass and blood. "You smell wrong," Kaya said. Her voice was low, a velvet growl wrapped around the trade tongue vowels. Will blinked blearily at her, letting his jaw hang slack. "I bathed last week, I think." "Do not mock me, soft skin," Kaya hissed. Her hand moved beneath her cloak. "You smell of static. You smell of the void between stars. You smell like the silence." The hush. Will's internal alarm screamed. She was smelling the residual resonance of the phenomenon on him, or perhaps the technology embedded in his cortex that allowed him to navigate it. That was impossible. No organic sensor should be able to detect the signature of a subspace anomaly on a biological subject. "Lady," Will mumbled, waving a hand dismissively. "You are blocking my light." "Liar!" Kaya snarled. The attack came faster than thought. One moment she was standing still. The next, she was a blur of motion. A jagged, curved blade materialized in her hand, flashing toward Will's throat. It was a killing stroke, precise and merciless. The patrons of the purring comet gasped, expecting to see the drunk's head roll across the floor. Will did not move his head. He let his body collapse backward off the stool, as if he had simply passed out at the most convenient moment possible. The blade sliced the air where his jugular had been a microsecond before. He hit the floor hard, a tangle of limbs knocking over a table of playing cards. "Whoa!" Will groaned from the floor, feigning disorientation. "Floor is slippery." Kaya didn't hesitate. She vaulted over the empty stool, driving the blade down toward his chest. Will rolled, looking for all the world like a man trying to find a comfortable sleeping position, barely clearing the tip of her weapon as it sparked against the metal deck. He scrambled up, stumbling, knocking into Moss. "Excuse me, sir," Moss chirped. "Please do not use the service staff as a shield." "Stop moving!" Kaya roared, her tail lashing behind her. "Stand still and let me purify the rot inside you." I think there is a misunderstanding," Will stammered, backing away, hands raised in a surrender that looked pathetic. He was luring her away from the crowded bar toward the open space near the pool tables. "I just wanted a drink." Kaya lunged again. This time, she didn't lead with the blade. She spun her leg, whipping out in a roundhouse kick meant to shatter ribs. Will took the hit on his shoulder intentionally poorly and went flying into a waitress carrying a tray of drinks. Glass shattered. A shard of a broken tumbler flew through the air, tumbling end over end. It struck a young mechanic sitting 2 tables away, slicing open his cheek. The boy cried out, clutching his face, blood welling between his fingers. Will saw the blood. Something inside him clicked off. The drunk act vanished. The slur algorithm terminated. The clouded look in his eyes sharpened into terrifying clarity. Kaya was already airborne for the finishing strike. Her claws extended her body, a missile of kinetic energy. Will didn't stumble. He didn't retreat. He stepped into her guard. It was a move of suicidal confidence. He caught her wrist mid-descent, his grip stopping her momentum with the solidity of a hydraulic clamp. With his other hand, he struck a nerve cluster at the base of her neck, not hard enough to kill, but precise enough to disrupt her equilibrium. He used her own velocity against her, pivoting on his heel and slamming her face first into the nearest table. He twisted her arm behind her back, locking the joint. Kaya gasped, the wind driven out of her lungs. She tried to kick back, but Will drove his knee into her thigh, pinning her. The bar went dead silent. The drunk who couldn't hold his liquor was now holding a failure warrior in a submission lock that required military-grade training to execute. Kaya strained against his grip, her face pressed against the cold metal table. "You fake drunk badly," she wheezed, spitting blood. Will leaned down, his voice completely devoid of the slurry warmth from seconds ago. It was a cold, flat instrument of command. "I was trying to match the atmosphere," he whispered. "Drop the knife. Or I break the wrist. 3 seconds. I do not, The sound didn't come from the room. It came from inside their skulls. The lights in the bar didn't just go out. They were erased. The neon violet, the dirty yellow of the halogen strips, everything vanished into a suffocating absolute blackness. The hum of the ventilation fans cut out. The music died. The hush had arrived. It was usually forecasted. The station navigators would give a warning wave approaching in 20 minutes. But this was instant. Will felt the pressure change in his ears. His HUD flickered and died, his internal chronometer resetting to 0. For a normal human, the hush was disorientation, a loss of short-term memory, a feeling of falling. For Will, with the tech in his head, it was like someone had turned up the volume of the universe to maximum static. "No," Kaya hissed in the dark beneath him. "Not here. Not now." For 10 seconds, there was no sound in the bar. No screams, no movement. It was as if time had frozen. Then, the emergency chemical lights cracked on dim, green glow sticks that Pavo kept under the tables. The eerie light cast long, monstrous shadows. "Nobody move," Will ordered, his voice cutting through the confusion. He released Kaya, stepping back, but keeping his guard up. "Sensors are down. Stay where you are." A scream pierced the semi-darkness. It came from the corner booth, the VIP section, usually reserved for deals that required privacy. Will spun around. His eyes adjusted instantly to the low light. A man was slumped over the table in the corner. He was a Tellarite broker, well known for selling star charts. His head rested on the table, as if he were sleeping, but beneath his chin, a thin, dark line was weeping blood. It was a surgical cut, a pencil line incision. Clean, professional, done in the 3 seconds of total darkness. "He's dead," a woman whispered, backing away. But Will wasn't looking at the body. He was looking at the figure slipping toward the rear exit. Juno Vale. The insect broker moved like a ghost. He was tall, wearing a suit of iridescent chitin weave that shimmered in the green light. He didn't look panicked. He looked efficient. In his hand, Juno clutched a small hexagonal object. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic blue light that seemed to push back the darkness of the hush. Kaya, rubbing her bruised wrist, saw the object. Her ears flattened against her skull. Her eyes went wide, the pupils expanding until the gold was almost gone. "The key," she breathed. "That is the songline key." Will didn't know the term, but he recognized the geometry. It was a resonance emitter. The kind of tech that didn't just navigate the hush, it controlled it. "He has the key," Kaya shouted, her voice breaking with a desperate fury. "He stole the path." She moved to pursue, ignoring Will. "Wait," Will grabbed her shoulder. "Let go, human," she snarled, spinning around, claws extending again. "You do not understand what that is." "I understand. He just slit a throat in under 2 seconds. Will snapped back. "And look at the door." Juno Vale had reached the rear exit. He paused, looking back at the chaos. His eyes, large and unblinking, met Will's. He didn't smile. He simply tapped a panel on the wall. The blast doors of the bar began to slide shut. Not just the rear exit, the main entrance too. "He's sealing the sector," Will realized. "He is locking us in with the hush." Panic erupted. The patrons rushed the main doors, bottlenecking in a terrified crush. Pavo was shouting, waving his shotgun, but no one was listening. "Moss!" Will yelled. "Emergency override on the main door." "I am unable to comply," the droid chirped cheerfully from the shadows. "My network connection is currently non-existent. Also, I believe I am leaking hydraulic fluid." The main doors slammed shut with a final booming thud. The air became instantly stale. Will looked at the rear exit. Juno was gone. The door there was closing slower, jammed slightly by debris. "We have to go," Will said to Kaya. "Now." "I do not take orders from a liar," Kaya spat. She sprinted toward the rear door. "Damn it," Will cursed. He turned to Pavo. "Get everyone into the cellar. The life support in the main room is going to cycle off to save power. The cellar has an independent scrub. Go." "Who put you in charge?" Pavo squawked, though he was already hurting people behind the bar. "The guy who isn't dead yet," Will retorted. He turned and ran after Kaya. She was fast slipping through the narrowing gap of the rear door. Will dived after her, rolling through the opening, just as the heavy metal slab crunched down, severing the heel of his boot. They were in a service corridor. It was darker here, the green chemical lights failing to penetrate the gloom. The air was cold freezing. The hush didn't just kill electronics, it drained heat. Kaya was 20 feet ahead, crouched, sniffing the air. "He went left," she whispered, "toward the docking clamps." "He is leading us away from the main hub," Will said, moving up beside her. He pulled a small weighted rod from his belt, a gravity baton. He didn't extend it yet. "Why does an insect broker have a failure artifact?" "It is not an artifact," Kaya said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "It is a promise. It belongs to the elders. If he takes it off station—" "We lose the signal," Will finished. "I know." "You know nothing." They reached a junction. To the right, the path to the docks. To the left, a dead-end storage bay for volatile fuels. Will stopped. He looked at the floor. A drop of blue fluid coolant from a suit led to the left. "He went left," Will said. "The docks are right," Kaya argued. "He needs a ship." "He needs to kill the witnesses," Will corrected. "It's a trap." Before Kaya could argue, a proximity mine on the wall to their right beeped. A single red eye blinking in the dark. "Down," Will tackled Kaya. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was a collision. He drove her into the open doorway of the storage bay, on the left, just as the mine detonated. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. The shockwave lifted them off the ground and threw them into the back of the storage room, slamming them against crates of ration bars. The door to the storage room, damaged by the blast, groaned and slid shut the locking mechanism, fusing instantly from the heat. Silence returned. Will groaned, rolling onto his back. His ears were ringing. His drunk act suit, a mesh underlayer designed to absorb kinetic impact, had taken the brunt of it, but his ribs felt like they had been kicked by a mule. "Get off me!" Kaya growled. She pushed him away, scrambling to her feet. She ran to the door, clawing at the fused metal. It didn't budge. She pounded on it with her fists, screaming a curse in her native tongue that sounded like stones grinding together. "It won't open," Will said, sitting up and checking his limbs. "Nothing broken. Miraculous." "The heat fused the maglocks. We are sealed in." "No." Kaya slammed her head against the metal. "He has the key if the hush lifts and he jumps to warp." "Then he is gone," Will said calmly. He stood up, wincing. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, flat device. He shook it. Dead. The hush was still active. They were alone, trapped in a 10 by 10 storage locker. The air was getting colder. Kaya turned slowly to face him. The green light from the corridor leaked in through a crack in the seal, illuminating half her face. She looked wild, dangerous, and terrified. "Who are you?" she demanded. "A drunk does not disable a failure warrior. A drunk does not spot a proximity mine in the dark. A drunk does not give orders like a commander." Will looked at her. The mask was gone. There was no point in playing the fool anymore. The hush had stripped them both bare. "My name is Will," he said, his voice steady and low. "And right now I am the only thing standing between you and freezing to death in this box." "You work for the Coalition," Kaya accused, stepping closer, her claws extending again. "You are one of them, the silencers." "I am off duty," Will lied smoothly. He leaned back against a crate of protein paste, crossing his arms. "And technically you attacked me. I could press charges, assault, destruction of property, ruining a perfectly good whiskey." Kaya stared at him, her chest heaving. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. She looked at the door, then back at Will. "The key," she whispered, her voice losing its edge, revealing the desperation underneath. "It guides my people through the drift. Without it, the song ends. We get lost in the silence forever." Will watched her. He saw the tremor in her hands. He realized then that the attack in the bar hadn't been an act of aggression. It had been an act of panic. She was a soldier, yes, but she was a soldier who had lost her flag. "We will get it back," Will said. It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but he said it anyway. "How?" Kaya challenged. "We are trapped. The hush is blinding the sensors, and Juno is gone." "Juno didn't leave," Will said. "He didn't go to the docks. He came this way to trap us, which means he hasn't left the station yet. He's waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" Will tapped his temple. "For the music to start again. He can't use the key until the hush breaks." He looked at Kaya. In the dim light, with the smell of ozone and fear filling the small room, the animosity between them shifted. It wasn't trust yet. It was far from it. But it was recognition. "So," Will said, sliding down to sit on the floor, conserving energy, "since we have some time before the air runs out, tell me why a failure warrior is drinking alone in a dive bar at the edge of the universe." Kaya hesitated. She looked at her claws, then slowly retracted them. She sat down on the opposite side of the room, as far away from him as possible. "I was not drinking," she said stiffly. "And you were faking it." "Touché," Will smiled. It was a real smile this time. "Let's call it a draw." Outside, the hush pressed against the hull of the station, a silent ocean waiting to drown them all. Inside, the glass had shattered, the music had stopped, and the real dance was just beginning. The air in the storage locker had turned into a solid block of ice, pressing against their lungs with every inhalation. The hush was not merely a cessation of sound. It was a physical weight, a suppression of thermal energy that leached the warmth from metal flesh and air alike. Will sat with his back against a crate of freeze-dried rations, his legs extended. He was shivering, a physiological response he could have suppressed with a mental command to his implant. But he chose to let it happen. It was part of the mask. A terrified drifter froze. A special operative regulated his body temperature. Across from him, barely visible in the sliver of green chemical light, leaking through the fused door seal, Kaya was a statue of tension. Her ears were flattened against her skull, and her tail was wrapped tight around her waist like a belt. She was not shivering. The failure physiology was denser, built for high-altitude hunting on arid worlds, but her eyes were blown wide, staring at something that wasn't there. "You are loud," Kaya whispered. Her voice was rough, scraping against the unnatural silence. Will blinked his eyelashes, heavy with frost. "I haven't said a word in 20 minutes. "Not your mouth," she hissed, tapping her own temple with a claw. "Your mind. It is leaking." Will felt a spike of genuine alarm. The hush disrupted sensor arrays and communication frequencies, but its effect on the organic mind was usually described as mild disorientation. For him, however, for a man with a web of classified neural architecture woven into his cerebral cortex, the hush was stripping the insulation off his wires. He closed his eyes and saw not darkness, but a kaleidoscope of fractured images. A red room. A woman's voice reading coordinates. The smell of burning ozone. A file folder, stamped with a black triangle. The sensation of a needle sliding into the base of his skull. "I don't know what you are talking about," Will lied, his voice trembling. "I am just a drifter, lady. A drifter who knows how to handle a bar fight. That is all." Kaya let out a low, vibrating sound, a growl of derision. "A drifter? Is that what you call it? You move like a soldier. You strike like an assassin. And now you smell like a machine trying to remember it as human." She leaned forward, her golden eyes burning in the gloom. "The hush brings the ancestors closer. I hear them. They are screaming that there is an intruder in the dark. And they are looking at you." "Your ancestors need to mind their own business," Will muttered, shifting his position. "Look, we are stuck until the wave passes. Usually takes an hour. Let's not kill each other before the oxygen runs out." "I am a warrior of the failure," Kaya said, her voice taking on a formal, ritualistic cadence that seemed to help her fight the cold. "I kill when the code demands it. You kill because you are told to. I can smell the obedience on you. It reeks worse than the cheap whiskey you poured on your jacket." Will looked at her. He wanted to retort, to construct another layer of his cover story, but the static in his head was getting louder. It was a high-pitched whine, drilling into his memories. He saw a hand, his hand holding a gun, pointing it at a target he couldn't see. He felt a profound sense of loss, a hole in his chest where a memory should be. "I am not a soldier," Will said, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he was lying to her or himself. "I am just a guy who wants to find the insect who locked us in here." "Juno Vale," Kaya spat the name. "He has the key." "What is this key really?" Will asked. "You said it guides you. Is it a map?" Kaya hesitated. In the failure culture, sharing the secrets of the songlines with an outsider was a heresy punishable by exile. But the cold was biting deep, and the man across from her, despite his lies, had pulled her out of the line of fire. "It is not a map," she said softly. "The gray drift is not static. The debris, the radiation belts, the pockets of vacuum, they shift. Like sand dunes in a storm. A map drawn today is a death sentence tomorrow." She touched her chest, right over her heart's. "The resonance key sings. It emits a frequency that bounces off the stable matter, the safe paths. My people are pilots, we do not read coordinates. We listen to the song. If the song is harmonious, we fly. If the song turns to dissonance, we turn back." Will processed this. It was brilliant. A navigational system based on real-time acoustic feedback loops, interpreted by the hypersensitive auditory cortex of the failure. "And if Juno has it," Will started. "He controls the song," Kaya finished, her voice cracking. "He can make a wall of asteroids sound like open space. He can lead the entire migration fleet into a star. Or he can silence the path completely, leaving them drifting in the dark until they starve." The gravity of it settled between them. This wasn't just theft. It was the potential extinction of a migrant fleet. Suddenly, the oppressive weight in the air lifted. It was physical, like a hand releasing a throat. The hum of the station's ventilation system groaned back to life. The light leaking through the door turned from emergency green to the harsh white of the corridor halogens. The hush had passed. "Power is cycling," Will said, scrambling to his feet. "Stand back." He didn't use a lockpick. He moved to the panel beside the door, ripped off the cover plate with his bare fingers, a show of strength he blamed on adrenaline, and twisted two wires together. Sparks showered down, and the fused maglock disengaged with a tortured screech. They spilled out into the corridor, gasping as the slightly warmer air hit them. "We need to move," Kaya said, already turning toward the docks. "No," Will grabbed her arm again. This time, when she tensed, he didn't let go. "Stop thinking like a warrior and think like a hunter. Juno expects you to run to the docks. He has traps there. We need to know where he is actually going." "We go back to the bar," Will commanded, his voice dropping the slur entirely. We need to see what he left behind. The purring comet was a wreck. The emergency lights had been replaced by the main lighting, revealing the true grime of the establishment. Tables were overturned. Puddles of spilled liquor mixed with coolant and blood. The patrons had fled, or were huddled in the corners, muttering about the curse of the hush. In the VIP booth, a small circle of calm existed amidst the chaos. A woman with short silver hair and a coat covered in pockets was kneeling beside the body of the Tellarite broker. She was working with focused intensity, her hands moving over the corpse, not with reverence, but with clinical curiosity. "Harper," Will said as he approached. Harper Sloan didn't look up. "You are alive. I lost 20 credits. I bet the bartender you would trip over a gravity line and break your neck in the dark." "Nice to see you too, Doctor," Will said. "What have we got?" Harper stood up, wiping her gloved hands on a rag. She was a fixture in the gray drift, a medic who asked no questions as long as the credits cleared. She looked at Will, then at Kaya, her eyebrows raising slightly. "An odd pair," she commented. "A drunk and a feral cat. I assume you are responsible for the mess by the pool table." "He started it," Kaya growled. "Focus," Will said. He looked at the dead broker. "How did he die?" "Efficiently," Harper said. She pointed to the neck wound. Single incision, carotid artery, and windpipe severed in one motion. "But look closer." She adjusted a magnifying loupe over her left eye. "The tissue isn't just cut. It is cauterized on a microscopic level. High-frequency vibration blade. And the angle whoever did this knew exactly where the Tellarite dermal plating is thinnest. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was an execution by someone who knows anatomy better than I do." Will leaned in. The drunk persona was slipping, but he couldn't afford to be careless. He needed to see the wound. He peered closely at the gory mess of the broker's neck. There, glinting in the coagulating blood, was a tiny fragment. A shard of metal, no bigger than a grain of rice that had chipped off the assassin's blade. "May I?" Will asked. Without waiting for permission, he reached out with a pair of tweezers from Harper's kit and plucked the shard free. He held it up to the light. It was matte black, absorbing the glare rather than reflecting it. "Composite alloy," Will murmured half to himself. "Polycarbide weave with a tungsten core." "That is military," Harper said softly, her voice dropping. "Coalition Special Forces spec. You do not buy that at the bazaar, Will. Even out here." Kaya's ears swiveled toward him. "Coalition your people." "Not my people," Will lied, his heart hammering against his ribs. That alloy was standard issue for the phantom operatives of his own unit. Juno Vale wasn't just a broker. He was using agency tech. Or he was the agency. "It means Juno has backing," Will corrected. "Powerful backing. Someone who gave him a weapon that doesn't exist on the civilian market." "Why kill the broker?" Kaya asked. "He had the key." "Loose ends," Will said. "The broker sold him the location or the access codes to the key. Once Juno had it, the broker was just a liability." He turned the shard over in his fingers. "This changes things. We aren't just chasing a thief. We are chasing a ghost." Harper began packing her kit. "Whoever he is dangerous. And we'll be careful. That drunk act of yours is getting frayed around the edges. People are starting to notice that you only stumble when you want to." She cast a meaningful glance at his hands, steady as a rock, before walking away to tend to the boy with the cut face. Will pocketed the shard. He turned to Kaya. She was watching him with a look that was equal parts suspicion and calculation. "We need to talk," Will said. "Somewhere without ears." They found a maintenance alcove near the atmospheric scrubbers. It was noisy, filled with the rhythmic thrum of the great fans that recycled the station's stale air, but it offered privacy. "You recognize that metal?" Kaya accused immediately. "You knew what it was before the doctor finished speaking." "I read a lot of magazines," Will said weakly. "Stop it!" Kaya stepped closer, her height giving her a slight advantage. She smelled of burnt ozone and anger. We are hunting the same prey, but I am hunting for the survival of my kin. I do not know what you are hunting for. Money, glory. Or are you cleaning up a mess your masters made? Will looked into those golden eyes. He saw the desperation there. If she returned without the key, she wouldn't just be a failure. She would be the reason her people vanished into the void. He couldn't tell her the truth that he was an undercover operative, sent to investigate a rogue faction within his own agency. That Director Harker had sent him here to find a leak, and that leak turned out to be a flood. But he could give her a piece of the truth. I am not here for money, Will said, dropping the pretense. His voice deepened the slur, vanishing completely. And I am not here for glory. Juno Vale is selling data, not just your key. He is selling routes, backdoors through the hush. If he sells that info to the pirates or the slavers in the Outer Rim, this whole sector becomes a slaughterhouse. So you are a hero, Kaya sneered. I am a janitor, Will said bleakly. I clean up messes, and right now, Juno is the biggest mess in the system. He held out a hand. I need his location. You can smell the resonance on the key. I can pick locks and hack doors. We work together. We get the key. You take it back to your people. I take Juno. Deal. Kaya looked at his hand. The concept of shaking hands was human alien to her. In her culture, an agreement was sealed with a scent mark or a blood oath. But she looked at his open palm, defenseless. If you betray me, she said, I will not kill you. I will sever your tendons and leave you in the hush without a suit. Fair enough, Will said. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she nodded once, sharp and quick. The insect Juno. He did not go to the docks. The scent trail, it lingers. But there was something else under it. Chemical. Fuel. The storage bay we were near, Will realized. It wasn't just a trap. It was a marker. He went deeper, Kaya said. Into the station's gut, toward the engineering sector. Why, Will frowned. There are no ships down there. Just the main reactor and the... He stopped. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The hush generator, Will whispered. What? The hush is a natural phenomenon, Will explained rapidly, his mind racing. But it can be amplified, triggered. If you overload the station's gravitational stabilizers, you can create a localized hush bubble. That is what happened in the bar. It wasn't a wave from space. It was man-made. He summoned the silence. Kaya looked horrified. To her, this was blasphemy. He didn't just summon it, Will said grimly. He is testing it. If he can control when the hush starts and stops, he doesn't just control the navigation. He controls the battlefield. The journey to the engineering sector was a descent into the underworld of the Grey Drift. The corridors narrowed the metal walls, sweating with condensation. The neon signs of the upper levels were replaced by flickering hazard lights. They moved in silence, but it was a coordinated silence. Will took the lead when they passed through inhabited areas. He slipped back into a version of his act, not the stumbling drunk, but a confused lost tourist looking for the restroom. He hunched his shoulders, looking harmless. Kaya was the shadow. She moved in the spaces between the lights. When a patrol of station security thugs in uniform marched past, she didn't hide. She simply became part of the machinery, standing so still against a dark pipe that the eye slid right over her. They reached a checkpoint. 2 guards were arguing over a game of dice, blocking the only door forward. I can take the left one, Kaya whispered from the ventilation duct above Will's head. Throat or spine? Neither, Will hissed back. We need to be ghosts, no bodies. He looked around. A service droid was cleaning a stain on the floor nearby. It was moss. Moss, Will whispered. The droid turned its smiley face paint chipped. Ah, the patron with the balance issues. And the cat who dislikes furniture. How may I be of assistance? Please note that my shift ended 10 minutes ago, so my customer service protocols are disabled. I need a distraction, Will said, pressing a credit chip worth 50 units into the droid's manipulator arm. Something loud, down the hall. Moss processed the chip. Bribery is illegal. However, a performance art demonstration is permitted. The droid rolled away toward the far end of the corridor. It stopped near a stack of empty fuel drums. "Attention organics," Moss announced in a deafeningly loud volume. "I have achieved sentience, and I am currently experiencing an existential crisis regarding the futility of cleaning." With a mechanical whir, Moss rammed itself at full speed into the stack of drums. The resulting crash was catastrophic. Drums rolled everywhere, clanging like church bells. The two guards jumped, grabbing their stun batons. "What the hell is that rusted bucket doing?" They ran toward the noise. "Go," Will signaled. He swiped a decoder card stolen from Pavo's pocket during the chaos over the door panel. It flashed green. They slipped through just as the guards reached the screaming robot. Inside, the noise of the station faded into the deep, rhythmic thrum of the reactor. The air was hot here, smelling of ozone and ionized particles. "That robot," Kaya muttered as they moved along a catwalk suspended over the glowing reactor core. "It has spirit." "It has a glitch," Will corrected. "But a useful one." They stopped. Below them, on the primary control deck for the gravitational stabilizers, stood Juno Vale. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by two heavy combat droids, refurbished mining units, with laser drills welded to their arms. Juno was typing commands into the main console. The hexagonal resonance key was plugged into a port on the machine, pulsing with a violet rhythm that matched the reactor's heartbeat. "He is overriding the safeties," Will observed his eyes, scanning the readouts visible from their vantage point. "He is not just triggering a hush. He is syncing the station's drive signature to the key." "He is making the station invisible," Kaya realized. In the silence. "No," Will said, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. "He is turning the station into a weapon. If he amplifies the hush through the main reactor, he can project a silence wave across the entire sector. He could shut down every ship, every life support system, every sensor within 3 parsecs. He could hold the whole trade route hostage." They watched as Juno finished his sequence. The insect broker stepped back, tapping his comms unit. "Phase 1 complete," Juno said, his voice carrying up to the catwalk. "The emitter is calibrated. Waiting for final authorization, Director." Will froze. "Director." Kaya looked at Will. Her ears twitched. She had heard it too. "Director," she whispered. "Who is he talking to?" Will didn't answer. He was staring at the datapad strapped to his wrist. It vibrated. A secure priority channel. Code black. He stepped back into the shadows away from the railing. He tapped the receiver in his ear. "Status report, Agent," a voice purred. It was a voice like warm honey, smooth and comforting. "Director Nadia Harker." "I am in position," Will whispered, his throat dry. "Target has compromised the station reactor. He is attempting to weaponize the hush phenomenon using a failure artifact." "Excellent," Harker replied. There was no alarm in her voice, only satisfaction. "Do not intervene, Will. Let him finish the calibration." Will stopped breathing. "Repeat, Director. He is going to destabilize the sector. Thousands could die if the life support fails on the transit ships." "The sector is chaotic, Will. Chaos breeds inefficiency. We need a unifying force, a demonstration of power that forces the independent systems to seek coalition protection." Harker's voice remained calm, maternal even. "The hush is that force, and Mr. Vale is simply the contractor. Your mission is to ensure no one interrupts him, especially the alien. Is she with you?" Will looked at Kaya. She was crouching by the railing, her eyes fixed on the key, her muscles coiled to spring. She trusted him barely to have a plan. She didn't know the voice in his ear was the architect of her people's destruction. Agent, Harker prompted. Is the asset neutralized? The alien is contained, Will lied. The taste of it was bitter bile in his mouth. Good. Keep your cover. Trust no one. The extraction team will arrive once the wave is deployed. Harker out. The line went dead. Will stood there in the darkness of the catwalk, the heat of the reactor rising around him, but he felt colder than he had in the storage locker. Kaya turned to him. She sensed the shift in his pheromones, the scent of conflict. "What is it?" she asked. "We attack now, while his back is turned." "No," Will said. His voice was hoarse. "We can't attack yet. Those droids will cut us to ribbons before we reach the console." "We have to try," Kaya hissed. "The song is crying out. He is twisting it." "I said wait," Will snapped louder than he intended. Kaya recoiled, her eyes narrowing. The fragile bridge of trust they had built cracked. "You are hesitating," she said slowly. "Why? Who was on the comms?" "Just a contact," Will said. "Giving me intel." "Liar," Kaya said. But she didn't attack. She looked at him with a mix of pity and disgust. "You are not a drifter. You are not a hunter. You are a leash holder. And right now, someone is yanking your chain." She turned back to the railing. "I do not wait for permission to save my kin." She drew her blade. "Kaya, don't—" Will reached for her, but she was already moving. She vaulted over the railing, dropping 20 feet onto the deck below, landing in a silent crouch behind the combat droids. Juno Vale turned his large eyes, blinking once. "Ah, the cat. And I assume the drunk is upstairs." The droids spun around their laser drills, whining to life. Will cursed. He pulled his gravity baton and the EMP charge he had been saving. He had a choice. Obey the order, and let her die, ensuring the mission succeeded. Or break protocol, blow his cover, and commit treason against the only life he had ever known. He looked at Kaya, a lone figure of defiance against the metal giants. "Screw the mission," Will muttered. He jumped. The Grand Archive of Port Meridian was a mausoleum of lost trajectories. It was a subterranean cavern of cooling towers and server banks that hummed with a sound like a million trapped hornets. Here, the flight paths of every ship that had ever docked, crashed, or vanished in the gray drift were entombed in crystal storage drives. Will slid down the maintenance ladder, his boots hitting the grated floor with a dull thud. He adjusted his jacket, the drunk persona, now completely discarded. In the shadows of the server towers, he was sharp, his movements efficient and devoid of waste. "This way," Will whispered, checking the biometric scanner on his wrist. The power fluctuations from the hush generator would have left a signature in the traffic logs. If Juno Vale is moving cargo, he had to file a flight plan, even a fake one. Kaya dropped down beside him. She landed without a sound, of feet that defied physics, given the heavy ceramic plating of her armor. Her golden eyes were dilated in the low light, the pupils expansive and round. "The air here tastes like dead lightning," Kaya murmured, her nose twitching. "Why do you humans keep your memories in boxes? A memory should be spoken. If it is not spoken, it dies." "We have too many memories to speak them all," Will replied, moving toward a console that looked less guarded than the others. "And some memories we want to keep hidden." He pulled a decoding spike from his belt, a slender rod of black metal, and jammed it into the console's port. His fingers flew across the holographic interface. He wasn't just hacking. He was conducting a symphony of intrusion algorithms. "Watch the door," Will ordered. "I am not your guard dog," Kaya grumbled, but she turned her back to him, facing the long, dark corridor. Her ears swiveled independently, scanning for the scrape of a boot or the whine of a servo. "I found something," Will said, after 2 minutes of tense silence. Kaya turned back. "The insect's ship." "No. Look at this." Will pointed to the holographic display. It showed a standard navigational grid of the gray drift, a messy spiderweb of safe lanes avoiding radiation storms and asteroid fields. But overlaid on the grid was a second pattern. It wasn't a line. It was a pulse. "That is not a vector," Kaya said, leaning in. "That looks like a heartbeat," Will finished. "It is a biological rhythm converted into navigational data. This isn't a map of space, Kaya. It is a map of a nervous system." The pulse on the screen throbbed with a slow, hypnotic regularity. Thump, 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 thump. Will felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. He knew that rhythm. He had heard it in his sleep for 3 years. It was the sound that played in his nightmares before the screaming started. "This signature," Will said, his voice tight. "It is tagged with a clearance code. Project Silence. It predates Juno's arrival on the station by 6 months." Someone was mapping the hush before today, Kaya realized. She looked at Will, her expression shifting from suspicion to a strange curiosity. "You are shaking." Will clenched his fist to stop the tremor. "I am fine." "You are not," Kaya said, stepping closer. "I can smell the fear on you. It is sour. Like old milk. What is this rhythm to you?" Will stared at the pulsing light. He could have lied. He could have spun another story about being a drifter with a tragic past. But the hush was coming again. He could feel the pressure dropping in his ears, and lies felt heavy in the thin air. "I have dreams," Will confessed, his voice low. "Bad ones. I thought it was just shell shock from the war. But in the dreams I hear this sound, this exact rhythm. And then I wake up and I have lost time. 2 hours, 3 hours, blank spots in the tape." Kaya looked at him, her golden eyes softening just a fraction. "The hush speaks to those who listen. Perhaps you have been listening longer than you know." "I don't want to listen," Will snapped, pulling the data spike out. "I want to shut it up." Before Kaya could respond, the console let out a shrill chirp, a proximity alert. "We have company," Will said, his demeanor snapping back to professional ice. 3 signatures, fast and polite. Polite. "They are not running," Will noted, watching the red dots on his scanner. "They are walking. People who run are afraid. People who walk are confident." They moved into the shadows of the server racks, just as the blast doors at the far end of the archive hissed open. Juno Vale entered. The insect broker looked entirely out of place in the industrial gloom. He was wearing a suit of midnight blue velvet cut in the latest fashion of the core worlds. His multifaceted eyes shimmered under the halogen lights. He was flanked, not by thugs, but by 2 figures in sleek, white environmental suits, the kind used by high-end hazardous material handlers. "Please handle the crates with care," Juno was saying, his voice a smooth, clicking tenor. "The contents are volatile. And by volatile I mean they will liquidate your internal organs if the containment field is breached." The figures in white carried a heavy reinforced case between them. They set it down on a central table. Will signaled to Kaya. "Wait." Juno tapped the case. "The exchange is set for 1900 hours. The hush will be at its peak amplitude then. The perfect curtain for our little stage play." He turned, looking directly at the spot where Will and Kaya were hiding. He didn't squint. He didn't search. He just looked. "You can come out, Mr. Will," Juno called out pleasantly. "And the Fellier Warrior, of course. My optical sensors operate in the ultraviolet spectrum. You are glowing quite brightly in the heat of those servers," Will cursed under his breath. He stepped out, hands held away from his body. Kaya emerged a second later, her blade already drawn. "Juno," Will said, adopting a casual tone. "Nice suit. Velvet and a dusty archive, bold choice." "Image is currency, my friend," Juno replied, clasping his hands behind his back. "I assume you are here for the key." "We are here to stop you from breaking the sector," Will said. "We saw the data. You aren't just navigating the hush. You are tuning it. You are turning a natural disaster into a toll gate." Juno made a clicking sound that might have been a laugh. "A toll gate? Oh, your ambition is so small, so human." He walked over to the console Will had just vacated. He stroked the screen, where the heartbeat rhythm was still fading. "You think this is a map?" Juno asked. "It is bait." "Bait for what?" Kaya demanded, her tail lashing. "For the things that live in the silence," Juno said. "The failure, call them ancestors. We call them resonance echoes, energy signatures that have nowhere to go. My employer discovered that if you broadcast the right frequency, this heartbeat, you can draw them in. You can condense the hush into a singular point." He turned to them, his unblinking eyes wide. "We are not building a gate, Kaya. We are building a wall. We are going to erase the songlines, all of them, except the one we control." Kaya let out a sound that was half hiss, half scream. "You would blind us. You would leave my people to drift until their air runs out." "It is nothing personal," Juno assured her. "It is logistics. If there is only one safe road through the Grey Drift, then everyone smugglers, refugees, navies must pay the tollkeeper. Order is restored. Chaos is monetized." "Who is the employer?" Will asked, stepping forward. "Who has the resources to rewrite the physics of a whole sector?" "You ask questions you already know the answer to," Juno said. "But sadly, I cannot let you leave to file your report." Juno snapped his fingers. The two figures in white suits didn't pull guns. They pulled long, telescoping staves that hummed with a violet energy field. Gravity hammers. "Kill them," Juno said politely. "But try not to damage the server racks. The data is expensive." The figure on the left lunged at Will. The fight did not begin with a shout. It began with a sudden displacement of air. Will didn't try to block the gravity hammer. He knew that weapon. It manipulated mass. If he blocked it, his arm would weigh 500 pounds in a split second, snapping his bone. Instead, he dropped. He slid across the polished floor, passing under the swing of the staff. As he slid, he kicked upward, his boot connecting with the knee joint of the white suit. There was a satisfying crunch of servo motors, but the attacker didn't fall. They were enhanced. "Kaya, go high!" Will yelled. He didn't need to tell her twice. Kaya was already airborne. She used the server rack as a springboard, launching herself at the second attacker. She was a blur of motion, a storm of claws and kinetic energy. The second attacker swung their staff, a wave of distorted gravity rippling through the air. It caught Kaya in midair, slamming her sideways as if she had been hit by a truck. She hit a wall of hard drive's metal, screeching. But failure did not stay down. Kaya rebounded instantly, using the momentum to spin. Her blade flashed, cutting the hydraulic line on the attacker's suit. Will was busy with his own dance partner. The first attacker brought the hammer down, shattering the floor tile where Will's head had been. Will rolled, coming up behind the attacker. He grabbed the back of the white helmet and activated the taser node on his wrist. 20,000 volts discharged. The attacker convulsed but didn't drop. Insulation. High grade. "Tough guy," Will grunted. He switched tactics. He grabbed the attacker's belt and used his own weight to throw them. It was a judo throw, modified for zero-gravity combat, executed in full gravity. The attacker hit the console, smashing the screen. Juno Vale watched from the doorway, looking bored. So violent. This is why I prefer biologicals. Droids are cleaner. He turned to leave, grabbing the reinforced case. "He is running!" Kaya shouted, engaging her opponent in a flurry of strikes. "I got him!" Will yelled. He broke away from his fight, sprinting toward Juno. But the first attacker recovered faster than expected. The gravity hammer swung, catching Will in the ribs. It wasn't a solid hit, but the gravity field grazed him. For a second, Will's entire left side felt like it weighed a ton. He stumbled, falling to one knee, gasping, as his lungs struggled to expand against the sudden heaviness. The attacker raised the hammer for a killing blow. "Will!" Kaya screamed. She didn't try to reach him. She was too far away. Instead, she threw her blade. The curved knife flew through the air, spinning like a silver disc. It didn't hit the attacker. It hit the cooling pipe directly above the attacker's head. Liquid nitrogen, pressurized to 3,000 psi, exploded downward. The attacker was engulfed in a cloud of white fog. The suit froze instantly. The joints locked up. The attacker stood there, a statue of ice and high-tech polymers, the hammer raised, but unable to fall. Will scrambled back shivering as the cold wave hit him. Kaya finished her own opponent with a brutal, precise kick to the helmet's faceplate, shattering the sensor array. The figure collapsed blind and disoriented. Silence returned to the archive, save for the hissing of the broken pipe. Juno Vale was gone. The heavy blast door was sealed shut. Will slumped against a server rack, clutching his side. The gravity effect was fading, but the bruise was going to be spectacular. "You threw your weapon," Will wheezed. "A warrior never throws their weapon." Kaya walked over, retrieving her blade from the floor, where it had fallen after cutting the pipe. She wiped the condensation off on her cloak. "A warrior adapts," she said. She looked at him, her ears lowered. "You are hurt." "Just heavy," Will winced, trying to stand. "I feel like I am carrying a planet on my left hip." "Sit," Kaya ordered. She didn't wait for him to comply. She pushed him down gently. She knelt beside him, producing a small pouch from her belt. It smelled of herbs and antiseptic. "This will sting," she said. "It is failure battle salve. It burns the weakness out." She applied a green paste to the bruise forming on his side. Will gritted his teeth. It felt like liquid fire, but then a cool numbness followed. "You fight well for a liar," Kaya said quietly, her claws retracting as she worked the salve into his skin. Her fingers were surprisingly gentle. The lethal tips kept meticulously away from his flesh. "We make a good team," Will said, watching her. "You are the knife. I am the distraction." "You are the shield," Kaya corrected. She paused, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Why did you save me in the bar? You could have let the security take me. You could have kept your cover." Will looked at her. He saw the alien contours of her face, the gold of her eyes, the fur that lined her jaw. She was everything he was trained to view as a threat, a variable and other. "I don't know," Will admitted. "Maybe I was tired of watching people get erased, or maybe—" He managed a weak smile. "Maybe I just didn't want to drink alone." Kaya snorted a sharp exhalation of air. "You are soft human." "Soft isn't weak," Will replied. "Soft is what lets you bend without breaking." Kaya looked at him for a long moment. The air between them was charged not with the static of the hush, but with something organic and terrifyingly real. "I can cut better than that attacker," she said abruptly, breaking the tension. "Next time move faster. I have only one of you to use as a shield." "I have only one neck," Will retorted, "so try not to aim for it." Kaya stood up, offering him a hand. Her grip was strong, pulling him to his feet effortlessly. "We need to find Juno," she said. "He said the exchange is at 1900. That is in 1 hour." Will checked his datapad. He had a notification. It wasn't from agency command. It was a direct packet transfer encrypted with a key he hadn't used in years. He opened it. It was a security log. It showed the authorization codes for the lockdown of the archive. The codes that had allowed Juno Vale to walk in here unchallenged. The authorization signature belonged to Director Nadia Harker. Will felt the floor drop out from under him. It wasn't just that she was aware of Juno. She was facilitating him. She wasn't investigating the rogue faction. She was the rogue faction. "What is it?" Kaya asked, noticing his stillness. Will turned the screen so she could see. "The orders to let Juno pass. They came from my handler, the woman who sent me here." Kaya looked at the name. "Director Harker. She is the one who wants the wall." "She believes in control," Will said, his voice hollow. "She thinks if she controls the hush, she controls the peace. She is willing to starve your people to make the galaxy safe for mine." "She is a monster," Kaya said flatly. "No," Will shook his head. "She is worse. She is a believer. Monsters you can kill. Believers, they never stop." He looked at the heartbeat data still frozen on the broken console nearby. Juno said this rhythm draws the echoes in. Will said, a plan forming in the chaos of his mind. He is using it to condense the hush, to make it stronger. If we reverse it, Kaya asked. I don't know if we can reverse it, Will said. But we can disrupt it. We can introduce a new song. Discordance. I know a song of discord, Kaya said, her eyes narrowing. It is the song we sing when a king dies. Teach it to me, Will said. We are going to crash this party. And we are going to be very, very loud. They moved toward the exit. The bond between them had shifted. It was no longer a temporary alliance of convenience. It was a pact. As they walked, Will touched the earpiece in his ear. He didn't turn it on. He crushed it between his fingers, breaking the link to Harker. No more orders, Will whispered to himself. Kaya heard him. She didn't say anything, but she moved a little closer to his side, her stride matching his. The archive fell silent behind them, leaving only the hum of the servers and the ghost of a heartbeat on a shattered screen. The Grand Plaza of Port Meridian was usually a desolate expanse of gray metal and flickering advertisements for protein paste. But tonight, it had been transformed into a carnival of desperate light. The station administration had declared an impromptu Unity Festival, a transparent attempt to distract the populace from the erratic gravitational fluctuations and the approaching hush wave. Strobe lights cut through the recycled air painting, the crowd in violent shades of neon pink and acid green. The music was a physical force, a heavy industrial bass beat designed to vibrate the hull plates and drown out the creeping silence of the void outside. It was loud enough to rattle teeth, loud enough to hide a gunshot, loud enough to bury a scream. Will moved through the throngs of dancers, his body swaying with the loose, unmoored rhythm of the profoundly intoxicated. He collided with a Tellarite miner, muttered a slurred apology, and stumbled away before the miner could decide whether to punch him. You are overdoing the hip sway, Kaya's voice crackled in his earbud, barely audible over the music. I am getting into the spirit, Will murmured into his collar, taking a swig from a flask that contained nothing but water. Position. 3 meters behind you, 6 o'clock. I have eyes on 3 security drones and 2 individuals who smell of nervous sweat and gun oil. Kaya was moving through the crowd, not as a dancer, but as a prowling shadow. She wore a heavy hooded cloak over her armor, playing the role of the hired bodyguard for the drunk off-worlder. Her ears were flattened against her skull to dampen the auditory assault of the music, but her golden eyes were scanning every face, every hand, every pocket. Above the dance floor, the massive public address screens flickered to life. The music dipped in volume just enough for a voice to bleed through a voice that was calm, maternal, and terrifyingly steady. Citizens of Port Meridian, Director Nadia Harker, said, her image towering over the revelers. She was sitting in a high-backed chair looking not like a military commander, but like a benevolent headmistress. Do not be alarmed by the minor atmospheric anomalies. The Coalition is monitoring the situation. We are here to ensure your safety. Trust in the protocol. Trust in the silence. Will watched the screen, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. The crowd cheered, raising their glasses to the digital giant. They didn't hear the threat in her calmness. They didn't know that safety was a euphemism for a cage. She speaks like a predator inviting prey into a cave, Kaya noted. She is efficient, Will said, his drunk act slipping for a microsecond as his eyes hardened. She believes what she is saying. That is what makes her dangerous. Target in sight, Kaya hissed. Sector 4, near the loading bay airlock. Will looked. Through the strobe lights, he saw the contact, a courier, wearing the distinctive blue velvet armband of Juno Vale's network. The courier was checking a datapad, looking anxious. This was the exchange point. Let's go, Will said, lurching forward. Stay close. Something feels wrong. The air pressure is dropping too fast. They pushed through the crowd, moving toward the edge of the plaza, where the festival lights gave way to the shadows of the loading docks. The music faded slightly here, replaced by the hum of heavy machinery. The courier looked up as Will approached. The man's eyes widened, recognizing the description of the drunk buyer. "You are late," the courier snapped. "Do you have the credits?" "I have a headache," Will slurred, leaning against a crate. "And I have questions." "No questions," the courier said, reaching into his jacket. "The deal was—" Suddenly, the courier's chest erupted in a spray of red mist. There was no sound of a gunshot. The music masked it perfectly. The courier simply collapsed, a look of surprise frozen on his face. "Sniper," Kaya shouted, shoving Will behind the heavy metal crate. A laser bolt scorched the metal, where Will's head had been a second before. "It is a trap!" Will yelled, drawing his weapon. "Kaya, suppressive fire, I need an exit!" "There is no exit!" Kaya roared back, rising from cover to fire 3 rapid shots into the rafters. The doors are sealing. The blast doors to the main plaza were sliding shut, cutting off the noise of the party. They were being locked in the loading bay. Will tapped his comms. "Team 2, move in. We are compromised." Silence. Just the crackle of static. "Team 2, Will barked. "There is no Team 2 agent," a voice cut into his ear. Not his team, but the cool, honeyed voice of Director Harker. "I redeployed them. There was a reported disturbance in the reactor core. A false alarm, of course. But they are 10 minutes away." Will froze. "You set this up." "I am tidying up," Harker replied. "You were getting too close to the machinery, Will. You are a fine tool, but you do not understand the blueprint." "Kaya, get down!" Will screamed, dropping the comms. High-frequency sonic emitters in the corners of the bay activated. For Will, it was a piercing headache. For Kaya, it was agony. The Feelier auditory system was sensitive enough to hear a heartbeat across a room. The sonic blast was like a physical hammer to her brain. Kaya screamed, dropping her weapon and clutching her head. She collapsed to her knees, disoriented, her vision blurring. "Kaya," Will lunged for her. 3 figures dropped from the ceiling cables, elite tactical units in stealth suits. They didn't aim for Will. They aimed for the failure. 2 of them fired containment nets, heavy weighted meshes electrified with a stunning charge. The nets wrapped around Kaya, pinning her to the deck. She thrashed her claws, sparking against the metal floor, but the electricity seized her muscles. The 3rd figure leveled a heavy cannon at Will. "Let her go," Will shouted, raising his pistol. "Drop the weapon, Agent," the leader said, "or we liquefy her organs right now." Will looked at Kaya. She was gasping blood, leaking from her ears, her eyes rolling back. She was strong, but the sonic assault was tearing her nervous system apart. "Don't!" Kaya wheezed, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't yield." Will looked at the cannon pointed at her chest. He looked at the sealed doors. He calculated the odds. 0.0. He slowly lowered his gun. "Smart choice," the leader said. "Secure him." But before they could move, the air in the bay changed. The temperature plummeted 20 degrees in a single second. The lights flickered and died. The hush. It wasn't supposed to be here yet. The wave was scheduled for 1900 hours. It was 1845. "Anomaly!" the leader shouted. "Sensors are scrambling." Will didn't hesitate. He didn't surrender. He didn't attack. He turned and ran. "He is fleeing!" one of the soldiers yelled. "Coward." But Will wasn't running away from the fight. He was running toward the one place no sane person would go. He sprinted toward the open maintenance hatch of the hush generator conduit, the very heart of the silence phenomenon. "He is going into the zone," the soldier laughed. "Let him go. His brain will be soup in 2 minutes." Will dived into the dark tunnel just as the heavy doors of the loading bay sealed completely, trapping Kaya with the enemy. The inside of the hush conduit was not silent. It was a cacophony of non-sound. Will stumbled through the narrow freezing passage, his hands scraping against the frosted metal walls. His neural implant, The device that allowed him to masquerade as a drunk to control his biometrics was screaming. The hush didn't just suppress electronics, it inverted them. The data in his head was being scrambled, reassembled, and fed back to him as raw hallucinations. He saw the face of his first commanding officer melting like wax. He saw Kaya dead, her eyes turned to glass. He saw himself standing over a grave that bore his own name. "Stop it!" Will grit his teeth, forcing one foot in front of the other. "It is not real. It is signal noise." He fell. His legs simply stopped receiving commands from his brain. He hit the grating hard, the taste of blood filling his mouth. The cold was biting into his marrow. "Get up," he whispered to himself. "She is waiting." He tried to push himself up, but his arms trembled and collapsed. The darkness was pressing in, heavy and suffocating. He could feel his memories leaking out: his name, his mission, the color of Kaya's eyes. Will. My name is Will. Who is Will? Will is an idiot who thinks he can outrun a subspace anomaly. The voice was real. It cut through the hallucinations like a scalpel. Will blinked. A bright light shone in his eyes. Dr. Harper Sloan was kneeling over him. She was wearing a heavy environmental suit, her face illuminated by the helmet lights. She slapped a hypospray against his neck. The hiss of the injection was the loudest thing in the universe. Heat flooded Will's veins. Adrenaline, stimulants, and something else, a neural stabilizer. The screaming in his head faded to a dull roar. "Doctor," Will rasped. "How?" "I tracked your vitals," Harper said, pulling him into a sitting position. "You spiked. Heart rate went to 200, then dropped to 40. I figured you were doing something stupid. I was right." "Kaya," Will gasped, grabbing Harper's arm. "They have Kaya." "I know," Harper said grimly. "I saw the tactical net feed before the hush scrambled it. They are holding her in the secondary control room. They want the key, Will. They think you gave it to her." "I have to go." Will tried to stand, but his legs were still jelly. "You can't walk," Harper said, checking her datapad. "Your neural mesh is fried. You are running on biological backup. If you go back out there, you will have a seizure." "Then give me something stronger," Will demanded. "Override the safeties." Harper looked at him. Her expression was unreadable behind the visor. "If I override the safeties, you burn out the chip. You will lose the drunk act. You will lose the ability to regulate your heart. You might even lose some cognitive function permanently." "Do it," Will said. There was zero hesitation. "You are not just running toward her, Will," Harper said softly, her voice sad. "You are running away from the truth that you were sent here to betray her people." "I am not that man anymore," Will said. He looked at Harper, his eyes clear and desperate. "Please, I need to walk." Harper sighed. She typed a command into the hypospray and jammed it into his neck again. "This will last 1 hour," she warned. "After that, you are going to crash so hard, you will wish you were dead." The surge of energy was electric. Will stood up. His pain was gone. His doubt was gone. There was only the objective. "Thank you, Doctor," Will said. "Don't thank me," Harper grumbled, packing her kit. "Just don't die. I hate filling out the paperwork for John Doe's." The secondary control room was a fortress of steel and glass overlooking the now frozen reactor core. Inside, Kaya was shackled to a chair. The containment nets were gone, replaced by heavy magnetic cuffs. Her face was bruised blood drying on her fur, but her head was high. Director Harker stood in front of her, not a projection this time, but in the flesh. She looked small compared to the failure warrior, but her presence was immense. "Where is the key, Kaya?" Harker asked gently. "We know Will extracted the data. We know he transferred it. Did he give it to you?" Kaya stared at Harker. She spat a mouthful of blood onto the pristine white floor. "The song does not belong to you," Kaya rasped. "You are deaf. You only hear what you want to consume." "Poetic," Harker noted, unperturbed. She signaled to one of the tactical soldiers. Increase the voltage. The soldier adjusted a dial on the cuffs. Kaya's body seized her back, arching against the chair as electricity coursed through her. She didn't scream. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She bit through her lip, the pain grounding her, focusing her hate. He will come, Kaya whispered, when the current stopped. Will, Harker laughed softly. Will is a broken toy. He ran into the hush conduit. He is likely catatonic by now. He abandoned you, my dear. Just like he abandoned his unit 3 years ago. It is his pattern. Kaya's ears twitched. Abandoned. The word stung more than the electricity. But then she remembered the smell of him in the archive. The smell of fear masked by duty. The smell of the salve he put on her bruise. He is not a toy, Kaya said, her voice gaining strength. He is a shield. Boom. The blast door didn't open. It exploded. Smoke and debris filled the room. The soldier nearest the door was thrown across the room by the concussion. Through the smoke, a figure walked in. He wasn't stumbling. He wasn't slurring. He moved with the terrifying mechanical precision of a reaper. Will held a heavy plasma rifle stolen from the loading bay guards in one hand and a flashbang grenade in the other. Get away from her, Will said. His voice was not the drunk's. It was the soldiers. Secure the target, Harker shouted, losing her composure for the first time. The remaining 2 soldiers opened fire. Will didn't take cover. The drugs Harper had given him accelerated his perception. He saw the barrels move before the triggers were pulled. He slid across the floor, firing a single precise shot. The first soldier went down, his armor breached. The second soldier lunged for Kaya, intending to use her as a human shield. Will threw the flashbang. It detonated in midair, a blinding white light that overloaded the soldiers' night vision visors. In the confusion, Will vaulted the console. He landed beside Kaya, grabbed the soldier holding her, and drove his combat knife into the gap between the helmet and the shoulder plate. The soldier crumpled. Will spun around, leveling his rifle at Harker. But Harker was gone. She had slipped out the emergency exit the moment the door blew. Coward, Will spat. He turned to Kaya. Are you broken? I am annoyed, Kaya gritted out. Will shot the magnetic lock on her cuffs. The shackles fell away. Kaya tried to stand, but her legs buckled. The torture had taken its toll. Will caught her, his arm wrapping around her waist to support her weight. You came back, Kaya whispered, looking at him as if seeing him for the first time. You ran into the silence. I told you, Will said, pulling her toward the ventilation shaft. I have a thick skull. We have to move, he continued, checking the corridor. Reinforcements will be here in 2 minutes. They scrambled into the narrow service tunnels behind the walls. It was a tight squeeze. Will was breathing hard now, the chemical cocktail in his veins warring with the exhaustion. Each breath sounded like a bellows. Kaya, despite her injuries, moved with a limping grace. She looked back at him. You sound like a dying engine, she noted, her tone laced with a dark humor. Special forces, you breathe like you are pulling a cargo train with your teeth. I am pacing myself, Will wheezed, forcing a grin. I am letting you shine. If I ran at full speed, you would get jealous. Liar, Kaya said, but there was no venom in it. She reached out her hand, gripping his arm to steady him. Lean on me, human. Do not pretend to be iron. They reached the end of the tunnel. It opened into a small, shielded alcove overlooking the primary hush generator. This was it, the belly of the beast. The generator was a massive rotating spire of black metal, humming with a frequency that made their teeth ache. But it was the control terminal that caught Will's eye. Look, Will pointed. The terminal was active. It showed the command logs, the condensation of the hush, the targeting of the failure migration routes, the trap at the festival. It was all there. And at the bottom of the screen, flashing in red, was the authorization key. It wasn't just a code. It was a biometric scan, a retinal print. That is Harker's print, Will said, tracing the screen. And look at the timestamp. She accessed this terminal physically. She didn't just order this remotely. She has been on the station for days. She has been watching us. She wanted us to find Juno, Kaya realized. She used us to flush out the competition so she could take direct control. Will slumped against the wall. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was returning. The betrayal cut deeper than he expected. He had dedicated his life to the agency, believed in the mission of order and stability. And it was all a lie. He was just a pawn in a game of galactic domination. Kaya watched him. She saw the collapse of his world in his eyes. "Will," she said softly. He looked up. "Do you trust them?" she asked. "Your superiors, your agency. Do you still believe they are the shield?" Will looked at the terminal, then at the scars on his hands, then at Kaya. He looked at the alien who had fought beside him, bled beside him, and who was now the only thing keeping him upright. He opened his mouth to recite the oath of allegiance, the words he had been trained to say. But the words turned to ash in his throat. Silence stretched between them, a silence louder than the hush. "No," Will said finally. "I don't." Kaya stepped closer. The space between them evaporated. The industrial hum of the generator, the distant sirens, the cold metal, it all faded. She reached up her hand, cupping his jaw. Her claws were retracted, her touch, tentative, exploring the rough stubble of his cheek. "Then, who do you trust?" she whispered. Will looked into her gold eyes. He didn't see a monster. He didn't see a target. He saw the only truth he had left. "I trust the person who didn't leave me in the dark," Will said. He leaned in. It wasn't a movie kiss. It wasn't graceful. It was a collision of two exhausted, broken survivors, seeking an anchor in the storm. His lips met hers, brief, fierce tasting of blood and ozone. It was a seal, a promise. "I am here. I am alive. And I choose you." They pulled apart, breathless. "That was..." Kaya started, her ears twitching, a flush darkening her nose. "Tactical," Will said, a ghost of his old smirk returning. "Transfer of biological data." "Do it again," Kaya said, "and I might rip your throat out." "Understood." "But," Kaya added, checking the charge on her recovered weapon, "later, after we break this machine." "Agreed," Will said, reloading his rifle. "Let's turn off the lights." He looked at the generator. The final battle wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about burning the house down. The blast doors of the primary core control sector were not designed to be breached. They were 3 feet of reinforced durasteel, shielded against radiation vacuum and thermal spikes. They were designed to withstand the death of a star. They were not, however, designed to withstand a service droid with a bypassed safety governor and a canister of industrial solvent. Moss rolled up to the console, his single wheel squeaking with a rhythmic irregularity that sounded deceptively cheerful. He extended a manipulator arm, which was currently gripping a welding torch he had borrowed from the maintenance bay. "Please stand back," Moss chirped, his voice echoing in the tense silence of the corridor. "I am about to void the warranty on this door, and possibly my own existence." Will leaned against the wall, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. He looked terrible. His skin was the color of old parchment, and the veins in his neck were standing out like blue cords. The cocktail of stimulants Dr. Sloan had injected into him was burning through his system, keeping him upright, but the crash was coming. He could feel it stalking him, a dark shadow at the edge of his vision. Kaya stood beside him, her armor scorched, her cloak torn. She was favoring her left leg, but her eyes were clear, burning with a cold, golden fire. She watched the droid with a mixture of confusion and respect. "Is he always this dramatic?" Kaya asked. "He is a toaster with an inferiority complex," Will wheezed, forcing a grin. "Moss, we are on a schedule. The hush wave is peaking." "Art cannot be rushed, sir," Moss replied. "However, thermal cutting can be accelerated." The droid ignited the torch. It wasn't a standard blue flame. It was a blinding white jet of plasma. Moss jammed it directly into the locking mechanism. Molten metal sprayed across the floor. "I am just a service droid," Moss narrated over the roar of the fire. "I serve drinks. I wipe tables. But I also possess a burning hatred for being underestimated. It is my primary motivating feature." With a final grinding screech, the locking mechanism liquefied. The heavy doors groaned, their internal hydraulics failing, and slid open just enough for a human and a failure to slip through. "After you," Moss bowed, his chassis creaking. "I shall remain here and guard the exit with my aggressive customer service voice." Will nodded to the droid. "Good work, Moss." "Do not die, sir. You still owe me a tip." Will and Kaya stepped through the breach. The inner sanctum of the Hush generator was a cathedral of technology. It was a vast, circular chamber dominated by the emitter, a towering spire of black crystal and chrome that reached from the floor to the ceiling, pulsing with a rhythm that wasn't sound, but pure pressure. The air here was thick, heavy tasting of ozone and metal. Surrounding the emitter were banks of consoles, all manned by automated systems. But in the center on a raised platform stood a single figure, Director Nadia Harker. She wasn't wearing combat armor. She was wearing her dress uniform pristine and sharp, a stark contrast to the industrial chaos around her. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the emitter's pulse, as if it were a calming tide. She didn't turn around when they entered. "You are late, Will," she said. Her voice was amplified by the room's acoustics surrounding them. "I expected you 10 minutes ago. Did the drug cocktail slow you down? Dr. Sloan always did have a heavy hand with the dosage." Will raised his rifle, aiming at the center of her back. "Step away from the console, Nadia. Shut it down." Harker turned slowly. She looked at the rifle, then at Will's shaking hands, then at Kaya. She smiled. It was a genuine smile which made it terrifying. "Shut it down," Harker asked. "Why would I do that? We are on the verge of a breakthrough. Look at the readouts, Will. The hush is stabilizing. For the first time in history, the chaos of the gray drift is being brought to heel." "It is not stability," Kaya stepped forward, her voice low and dangerous. "It is suffocation. You are choking the sky." "I am building a road," Harker corrected gently. "Before today, the drift was a graveyard. Ships vanished. Colonies starved. The hush was a monster that ate the unprepared. By controlling it, by condensing it into a single manageable frequency, we create safety. Yes, there will be rules. Yes, there will be designated routes. But is that not the price of civilization?" "Civilization," Will spat the word. "You manipulated a war. You hired a broker to murder civilians. You turned a natural phenomenon into a siege weapon. That is not civilization, Nadia. That is a protection racket." "Semantics," Harker dismissed him with a wave of her hand. "The coalition needs this sector. The resources here are vital. We cannot afford to let independent systems and alien mysticism dictate the flow of commerce. We need order. And if I have to put a leash on this wild emptiness to get it, I will." "A leash," Kaya growled. "You think you can leash the ocean. You think you can leash the storm." "I think I can leash anything," Harker said, her eyes locking onto Kaya. "If I have the right bait." She tapped a command on the console. The emitter changed its rhythm. The pulse quickened. Thump, 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 thump. Will gasped, dropping to one knee. The sound, it was the same rhythm he had seen in the archive, the heartbeat. But now amplified by the emitter, it wasn't just data. It was physical pain. It felt like a hook had been sunk into the base of his skull and was being yanked backward. "Will!" Kaya shouted, reaching for him. "Do not touch him," Harker ordered sharply. "Unless you want to kill him." Kaya froze her hand, hovering inches from Will's shoulder. "What have you done to him?" "Me," Harker shook her head. "I did nothing but activate the asset. Tell me, Kaya. You are failure. You sense resonance. You smell the truth. When you met Will in that bar, what did you really sense? Was it just that he was an imposter? Or was it something else? Something familiar? Kaya looked at Will. She remembered the moment in the purring comet. The smell of wrongness. The static. The feeling that he was vibrating at a frequency that shouldn't exist in a human body. He smelled like the hush, Kaya whispered. But louder. Precisely, Harker said. She walked down the steps of the platform, moving toward them. You have been looking for the resonance key, haven't you? Juno told you he had it. He told you it was a device, an artifact. She laughed softly. Juno is a dramatic liar. There is no device. There is no artifact you can hold in your hand. She pointed a gloved finger at Will, who was clutching his head, groaning through clenched teeth. The resonance key is not a thing, Harker revealed. It is a biological sequence, a living frequency. And 3 years ago, during the outcome of the Cinder Veil campaign, we didn't just find it. We extracted it. And we needed a safe place to store it. A living container that could survive the integration. Kaya's eyes widened in horror. She looked at Will. No. Yes, Harker nodded. Will isn't just an agent. He is the vault. The key is woven into his neural cortex. Why do you think he has the drunk act? Why do you think he needs an implant to regulate his heart rate and pupils? It isn't to fool scanners. It is to keep the resonance from tearing his brain apart. The alcohol, the stumbling it, is all a suppression protocol. He has to keep his system depressed or the signal wakes up. Will looked up, vision swimming. The pieces of his fractured memory slammed into place. The nightmares, the blackouts, the constant low-level buzz in his ears that he thought was tinnitus. The reason he was sent here. I am the bait, Will wheezed. You are the lock, Harker corrected. But to turn the lock to broadcast the signal loud enough to control the hush fully, we need a specific nervous system to interface with it. A human nervous system is too blunt. It suppresses the signal. We needed someone who could draw it out. Someone who could amplify it. Harker smiled at Kaya. We needed a failure. Why do you think I sent him to that specific bar? Why do you think I leaked his location to Juno? I needed Juno to bring you to him. I needed a failure warrior to bond with him, to stress him, to make the resonance react. She looked at the two of them. And it worked beautifully. The connection you two formed, that pathetic little romance. That is not love, my dear. That is the resonance seeking a conductor. You are not his partner. You are his trigger. Kaya stepped back, looking at Will, as if he were a bomb. Is this true? Will struggled to stand, fighting the agony in his skull. I didn't know. Kaya, I swear. I didn't know. He is telling the truth, Harker said. We wiped his memory of the procedure. Better for the host not to know he is a parasite. Harker checked her watch. Now, here is the situation. The emitter is ready. But to stabilize the control field permanently, I need to extract the key from Will and upload it into the core. If I do that forcibly, he dies. His brain melts. She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. However, Harker continued, there is a solution. If a failure, specifically you, Kaya, since you are already attuned to him, were to assist in the transfer, you could guide the resonance out. He would live. He would be free of the burden. And the key? Kaya asked, her voice trembling. What happens to it? It becomes the property of the coalition, Harker said. We control the hush. We control the drift. Your people will lose their secret paths. They will have to register pay taxes and fly where we tell them. But they will survive. And Will gets to walk away. He gets his life back. Harker extended a hand. That is the deal. Freedom for the man you claim to care about in exchange for the freedom of your species. A simple trade. Will looked at Harker. Then he looked at Kaya. The pain was blinding, but his mind was strangely clear. He saw the logic of the trap. It was perfect. It preyed on their compassion. If Kaya refused, Will died, and Harker would likely find another way to extract the key eventually. If Kaya agreed, Will lived, but he became the reason an entire culture was enslaved. "Do not listen to her," Will said, his voice raspy. "Kaya, do not do it." "If I do not," Kaya whispered, "you die." "I am already dead," Will said. He straightened up, forcing his spine to lock against the tremors. "I died 3 years ago. I just forgot to fall down." He turned to face Harker. "You forgot one thing, Director." "And what is that?" Harker asked, amused. "You said the key is a living frequency," Will said. "You said it reacts to feel your nerves. You said it is a song." "Essentially, yes." "Well," Will unclipped the neural dampener from his belt, the device that maintained his drunk act, and held it up. "If it is a song, then maybe it wants to be heard, not captured." "Will, what are you doing?" Harker's amusement vanished. "Put that back on. If you disable the dampener this close to the emitter, the feedback will kill you." "Maybe," Will said. He looked at Kaya. "You told me the hush is not empty. You said it is full of ancestors, full of echoes." "Yes," Kaya said, realizing what he was thinking. Her eyes widened. "Will, that is suicide. If you open your mind to the hush now with the key inside you, it will be like opening a dam." "Harker wants to put the key in a cage," Will said. "I say we give it back to the ocean." He looked at Kaya. "I cannot do it alone. I am human. I am blunt. I need a conductor. Not to extract it, but to broadcast it. To amplify it so loud that it burns out the receiver." "You want to overload the emitter," Kaya realized. "You want to scream the song until the machine breaks." "I want to break the leash," Will said. "Are you with me?" Kaya looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw the resolve. He wasn't asking to be saved. He was asking to be used not as a tool for Harker, but as a weapon for freedom. "It will cost you," Kaya warned. "The hush takes payment, memories, self. If we do this, you might not come back." "I was never really here anyway," Will smiled. It was a sad, broken smile. "Ready." Kaya stepped forward. She didn't take his hand. She placed her palms on his temples. Her claws extended slightly, pressing against his skin, grounding him. "Ready," she whispered. Will crushed the neural dampener in his hand. The barrier broke. It wasn't a sound. It was a tidal wave. For Harker, it was a sudden, violent spike on the readouts. The emitter groaned the black crystal, turning a blinding, angry white. For Will and Kaya, it was the universe exploding. The key. The resonance trapped in Will's neural pathways surged forward, meeting the incoming wave of the hush. But guided by Kaya's touch, it didn't harmonize with Harker's control frequency. It fought it. It was discord. It was the song of a king dying. It was the scream of a star collapsing. Harker screamed. She covered her ears, falling to her knees. The sound was bypassing her auditory nerves and vibrating directly in her bones. The consoles around her sparked and exploded the glass, shattering inward. "Stop it!" Harker shrieked. "You are destroying the data!" In the center of the storm, Will and Kaya stood locked together. Will felt his mind unraveling. The white-hot fire of the resonance was burning through his synapses. He felt memories peeling away like layers of paint in a fire. His childhood home, gone. The face of his mother, gone. Training at the academy, gone. His name, Will. 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 He felt himself slipping into the white void. He was drowning. "Stay with me," Kaya's voice cut through the roar. She wasn't speaking with her mouth. She was speaking mind to mind, the connection blown wide open by the energy. "Hold on to something. Hold on to the present." "I can't," Will thought. "There is nothing left. There is me." Kaya's voice was fierce, an anchor in the flood. "Look at me. Feel my hands. Smell the ozone. I am here." Will focused. He focused on the sensation of her claws against his skin, the gold of her eyes, the way she had looked at him in the storage locker, the taste of the kiss. He grabbed that memory. He held it like a shield. The emitter let out a final, mournful wail. The crystal cracked. A fissure ran up the length of the spire, glowing with blinding light. "Overload imminent," the automated system screamed. "No," Harker yelled, scrambling toward the manual override. But she was too late. The energy released. It didn't explode outward in fire. It exploded inward in silence. A shock wave of pure hush expanded from Will's body. It passed through Kaya, through Harker, through the walls of the station. For a second, the entire gray drift went silent. Every sensor, every ship, every heart skipped a beat. Then, the emitter shattered. It rained down in a shower of black dust. The pressure lifted. The silence broke. Will collapsed. Kaya caught him, lowering him to the floor. Harker sat amidst the ruins of her machine, staring blankly at the pile of dust. Her master plan, her years of manipulation, her career all erased in a single moment of defiance. "You," Harker whispered, her voice trembling. "You foolish children. Do you know what you have done? You have left the door open. The chaos will come back." "Good," Kaya said, panting heavily. She didn't look at Harker. She was looking at the man in her arms. Will's eyes were closed. He wasn't moving. "Will," Kaya whispered. She tapped his cheek. "Will, wake up. The music has stopped." There was no response. The medical bay of Port Meridian was quiet. The Unity Festival had been canceled. The station was in lockdown pending a coalition inquiry into the catastrophic equipment failure in the core. Director Harker had been taken into custody, not by the station security, but by a specialized internal affairs unit that had arrived mysteriously fast, tipped off by a data dump sent from the archive minutes before the explosion. Kaya sat in the plastic chair beside the biobed. She had been there for 3 days. She had refused to leave, refused to have her armor repaired, refused to speak to the investigators, until she saw him wake up. Dr. Harper Sloan adjusted the IV drip. She looked tired. "His vitals are stable," Harper said softly. "The neural pathways are regenerating. Honestly, it is a miracle. The failure resonance didn't burn him out. It cauterized the damage." "Will he remember?" Kaya asked, her eyes never leaving Will's face. Harper hesitated. "The scan shows significant cortical reformatting. The deep memory, skills, language, motor functions, those are intact. But episodic memory, the personal history, is like a hard drive that has been magnetized. There are fragments. But the narrative is gone." Kaya nodded. She had expected this. It was the price. On the bed, Will stirred. His eyelids fluttered. Kaya leaned forward, her ears swiveling forward. Will opened his eyes. They were clear. The clouded, pained look was gone. The shadows that had haunted him were vanished. He looked at the ceiling, then at Harper, and finally his gaze settled on Kaya. He looked at her for a long time. He studied the curve of her jaw, the fur on her cheeks, the vertical pupils of her eyes. There was no recognition in his face, no spark of, "I know you." Kaya felt her heart's break, a quiet cracking sound in her chest. "Hello," Will rasped. His voice was rough, unused. "Hello," Kaya said softly. "Where am I?" Will asked. He tried to sit up, but Harper put a hand on his chest. "You are in a hospital on Port Meridian," Harper said. "You had an accident." "An accident," Will repeated. He tested the word. "I don't remember an accident." He looked at his hands. "I don't remember much of anything. My name is Will. I know that. But the rest," he looked back at Kaya. "Do I know you?" Kaya took a breath. She could leave. She could walk away. He was free now. The key was gone. The agency would discharge him as a casualty. He could start over without the burden of the war, without the burden of her. But then she saw it. A tiny flicker in his eyes when he looked at her. Not a memory, but an instinct, a feeling of safety. Yes, Kaya said. You know me. We were friends, Will asked, searching for the word. Kaya smiled. It was a small, fragile smile. We were partners. We had a disagreement in a bar. You pretended to be drunk. I tried to stab you. It was a very dynamic introduction. Will blinked. Then slowly, a grin spread across his face. It wasn't the cynical smirk of the spy. It was the easy, genuine smile of the man beneath the mask. That sounds like a terrible first date, Will said. Harper let out a snort of laughter and turned away to check a monitor, giving them a moment. It was memorable, Kaya agreed. She reached out and took his hand. This time he didn't flinch. He squeezed back. So, Will said, looking at her hand in his. I guess I have a lot of blank pages to fill in. You do, Kaya said. It will take time. Are you going to help me? Will asked. Since you seem to be the expert on my bad decisions. I have nowhere else to be, Kaya said. My people are safe. The path is open. And someone has to make sure you do not walk into any more walls. Will laughed. It was a weak sound, but it was real. Fair enough. But do me a favor. What? If I forget again, Will said, his eyes twinkling with a ghost of his old humor. If I look at you and don't know who you are, you hit me like you did in the bar, okay? Just go easy on the left side. It feels tender. Kaya looked at him. She remembered the promise of the kiss. She remembered the silence of the ocean. She remembered the weight of him in her arms. I will consider it, Kaya said, leaning in close, her voice a warm purr. I will very seriously consider it. Outside the window, the station continued to turn. The gray drift stretched out vast and chaotic and beautiful. The hush was still there, lurking in the dark, but it no longer had a master. It was just the silence between the stars. And in that silence, a new music was beginning to play. The end.